In 1962, when Harlem was balanced on the edge of promise and pressure, when opportunity came slow, but consequences came fast, a powerful mob boss made a decision that would seal his fate. He believed money could buy silence. He believed distance could buy safety. And most of all, he believed that betraying Bumpy Johnson for $50,000 was just business. He was wrong. Harlem in those days breathed like a living thing. The streets hummed with card games and corner sermons, with shoeshine boys and shopkeepers who knew every face that passed their door. Respect was the currency that mattered most. You could lose money and make it back. You could lose territory and fight for it again. But lose respect in Harlem, and you were already finished. The mob boss didn't understand that. He came from a world of ledgers and envelopes, from quiet offices where deals were signed behind closed doors, and loyalty lasted only as long as the next payoff. To him, Harlem was a market. Bumpy Johnson was a variable, and $50,000 was enough to tip the scale. Little did he know that what he saw as a clean transaction was the first step into a trap he couldn't see. What looked like profit was actually a countdown, because Bumpy Johnson never rushed justice. He scheduled it, and once the clock started, it never stopped. The mob boss's name carried weight downtown, but in Harlem, it meant nothing. He wore tailored suits and spoke softly, the kind of man who never raised his voice because he'd never had to. Power followed him into rooms before he arrived. Men stood when he entered. Deals closed when he nodded. He controlled shipping routes, union contracts, and a network of middlemen who never asked questions. He believed in leverage, not loyalty, in pressure, not patience, and he had survived long enough to think that made him smart. What truly defined him, though, was contempt. He saw Harlem as a place to extract from, not protect. Its people were margins on a balance sheet. Its struggles were inconveniences, and its codes, respect, word, consequence, were relics he could ignore. That arrogance showed in how he dealt with local businesses. Rents went up overnight. Promises were broken casually. Men who complained found themselves shut out, squeezed dry by contracts they didn't understand until it was too late. Families felt the pressure first. Store owners who couldn't make payroll. Barbershops that suddenly owed more than they earned. The mob boss told himself this was order, efficiency, progress. But to the people of Harlem, it felt like theft with a smile. And when whispers began to circulate that someone had offered him $50,000 to turn on Bumpy Johnson, information, access, a quiet betrayal, he didn't hesitate. He didn't ask who might get hurt. He didn't ask what line he was crossing. He asked how soon the money could be delivered. Bumpy Johnson wasn't just another name in Harlem. He was the line between chaos and stability. He protected the small operators, the families, the unspoken rules that kept the neighborhood standing when the world seemed intent on breaking it. He believed in balance, in consequence, in the idea that power without responsibility was just another form of violence. So when the mob boss agreed to sell Bumpy out, to trade his routes, his schedules, his protections for cash, it wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was an attack on the entire ecosystem Bumpy had built. The danger wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It came quietly, through changes no one could explain at first. A shipment delayed here, a warning missed there, pressure applied in places that had always been safe. People started asking questions. Why were the police suddenly one step ahead? Why did rival crews seem to know things they shouldn't? Why did doors that were always open suddenly close? Bumpy noticed everything. He noticed the patterns before others did, the timing, the precision, and when he followed the thread back to its source, he didn't explode. He didn't threaten. He didn't rush. He sat back. He listened. Because Bumpy Johnson understood something the mob boss never would. Betrayal doesn't scream. It whispers. And whispers are easier to track. The moral line had been crossed, not with a gun or a threat, but with greed. And in Bumpy's world, that was the worst kind of offense. You could fight an enemy. You could negotiate with a rival. But someone who sold out the community for money? That kind of man didn't learn lessons from words. Foreshadowing hung heavy in the air, though the mob boss couldn't feel it yet. What he thought was distance from Harlem was actually isolation. What he thought was secrecy was exposure. And what he thought was a victory was the beginning of the end. Because once Bumpy Johnson confirmed the betrayal, the response wasn't emotional. It was inevitable. The clock had started. 72 hours on the ledger of fate. And somewhere in the city, a man counting his money had no idea he was already out of time. It started on a Tuesday morning. Quiet, ordinary. The kind of day nobody remembers until it becomes the day everything changed. Eli Turner was just opening his number spot on 137th Street. He'd been doing it the same way for 15 years. Same storefront, same creaky door, same coffee cooling on the counter while he counted yesterday's slips. Eli wasn't rich, he wasn't flashy, but he paid on time, kept his word, and never caused trouble. Under Bumpy Johnson's protection, that was enough. At exactly 9:12 a.m., two men walked in. They didn't shout, they didn't threaten, they smiled. One of them handed Eli a folded piece of paper. No name, no letterhead, just a number written in pencil, an amount so high it made no sense. Back rent, new fees, penalties that didn't exist yesterday. Eli laughed at first, thought it was a mistake. Then the second man leaned closer and said almost kindly, "Things change. You should pay attention when they do." By noon, 3 more shops on the block got the same visit. By evening, word spread fast. Too fast. This wasn't random. This was coordinated. And the men delivering the message weren't Harlem muscle. They were outsiders. Clean shoes. Cold eyes. That night, Eli went home and told his wife something was wrong. Really wrong. Across town, similar scenes played out. A delivery rerouted at the last minute. A truck stopped and searched on a tip nobody could trace. A bookmaker questioned by police about details only an insider would know. Someone was feeding information upstream. And the mob boss, safe in his downtown office, was already counting the money. He sat behind a wide oak desk, the $50,000 divided neatly into envelopes. He felt clever, efficient, untouchable. In his mind, this wasn't betrayal. It was business evolution. Harlem was shifting. Old kings were slowing down. He was simply betting on the future. What he didn't know was that every move he'd made carried a signature. Bumpy Johnson saw it immediately. The news didn't come to Bumpy in a rush. It never did. It arrived piece by piece. A delayed shipment here, a worried shop owner there, a look exchanged between men who had survived too much not to trust their instincts. Bumpy listened without interrupting. He didn't pace. He didn't curse. He sat still, fingers steepled, eyes half-lidded, as if he were listening to music only he could hear. When Eli Turner finished explaining what happened, the room stayed silent for a long moment. Then Bumpy spoke, calm and low. "In this life," he said, "things don't break all at once. They crack, and cracks tell you where to look." He didn't ask who the mob boss was. He already knew. The patterns were too clean, the timing too perfect. This wasn't a street-level power grab. This was a sale. Someone had traded Harlem's safety for cash. Bumpy stood and straightened his coat. "I'm going to tell you something once," he said to the men in the room. "Nobody panics, nobody reacts, and nobody talks to anyone they don't already trust." One of his lieutenants asked if they should push back, apply pressure, make noise. Bumpy shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "Noise is what scared men make. We're not scared." That night, Bumpy sent out quiet feelers. No threats, no warnings, just questions placed carefully in the right ears. Within hours, the picture sharpened. The mob boss had sold routes, names, schedules, safe windows, all of it, wrapped neatly for $50,000. When the confirmation came, Bumpy didn't smile. He sighed, because betrayal to him was never surprising, just disappointing. And disappointment required correction. While Harlem tightened its grip and waited, the mob boss relaxed. He went to dinner that night at his usual place, ordered the same steak, laughed a little louder than usual. He told himself he'd outgrown street consequences, that he lived above them now, behind walls, guards, distance. He told himself Bumpy Johnson was a relic, a name that echoed louder than it acted. What he didn't know was that while he slept, Bumpy was mapping every step of his routine. Office hours, commute times, which guard paid attention, which one didn't. When the building emptied, when it didn't. No rush, no emotion. Bumpy believed patience revealed character. And in those 72 hours, the mob boss revealed everything. He made calls. He rearranged deals. He moved money again, confident he was ahead of the curve. Each move only confirmed what Bumpy already suspected. The man felt safe. And safety makes men careless. The dramatic irony hung thick. While the mob boss toasted his cleverness, Bumpy Johnson was closing doors one by one. While the mob boss planned expansion, Bumpy planned an ending. The truth was simple, and the mob boss missed it completely. He had already been judged. By the second night, Bumpy stopped gathering information. He had enough. He called a small meeting. No speeches, no explanations. Just instructions given quietly, respectfully, with the certainty of a man who knew the outcome before the process began. Movements were subtle. A man changed shifts. Another took a walk he'd never taken before. A phone call went unanswered on purpose. The mob boss noticed none of it. He arrived at his office on the third day like always. Same time, same entrance, same confidence. The building felt normal. Too normal. What he didn't realize was that normal had been arranged. The silence was intentional. The emptiness was measured. And every second brought him closer to the moment he could no longer buy his way out of. Because Bumpy Johnson didn't believe in chaos, he believed in balance, and balance was about to be restored. The third day began like any other for the mob boss. He woke early, dressed carefully, and glanced at himself in the mirror longer than usual. There was confidence there, satisfaction, the look of a man who believed he'd made the smartest move of his career. $50,000 sat safely where it couldn't be traced. New arrangements were already in motion. Harlem, he believed, was adjusting, folding, accepting the inevitable. What he didn't understand was that Harlem wasn't folding. It was holding its breath. Back uptown, Bumpy Johnson moved through his morning quietly. No urgency, no visible anger. He read the paper, drank his coffee, listened more than he spoke. Men came and went, receiving instructions that sounded ordinary to anyone listening too closely. Be where you're supposed to be. Don't rush. Let things happen. That was Bumpy's genius. He never announced justice. He allowed it to arrive naturally, like gravity. The mob boss spent the morning fielding calls, some routine, some congratulatory. People sensed a shift in power and wanted to align themselves early. He enjoyed that. It reminded him why he'd made the choice he did. Around noon, he noticed something strange. One of his regular contacts didn't answer. Then another. A minor inconvenience, he told himself. People get busy. Phones die. He pushed the thought aside. But unease has a way of returning. By mid-afternoon, his office felt quieter than usual. Too quiet. The secretary had stepped out longer than expected. The hallway noise thinned. Even the building itself seemed to pause. Still, he felt secure. Secure men ignore instinct. Across the city, Bumpy Johnson checked his watch once. Just once. The timing mattered. Not because he was impatient, but because justice, in his mind, should never be sloppy. While the mob boss leaned back in his chair, convinced distance made him untouchable, Bumpy Johnson was already closing the last gap. The truth the mob boss never grasped was simple. Power borrowed from money expires. Power built on respect endures. Every person involved in the betrayal had already made a choice, most without realizing it. Some chose silence. Some chose loyalty. Some chose to step away quietly and pretend they hadn't seen anything. Bumpy noticed who chose what, and he adjusted accordingly. The silence stretched. Minutes passed, then more. The mob boss finally stood and walked to the window. The street below looked normal. People moved. Cars passed. Life continued. That should have comforted him. Instead, it unsettled him. Because real danger doesn't announce itself, it blends in. At 4:47 p.m., the mob boss's phone rang. He answered sharply, irritation edging his voice. Yes? There was a pause on the other end. Breathing. Calm. Familiar. Then a voice said evenly, "You should have stayed in your lane." The line went dead. The mob boss stared at the receiver. His heart rate quickened, just slightly. He told himself it was nothing. A bluff, maybe. Someone fishing for leverage. But deep down, a different realization surfaced. Only one man would make a call like that. Only one man wouldn't bother with threats. He returned to his desk and poured himself a drink he didn't want. His hand shook enough to notice. The silence returned, heavier now. Then came the sound. Footsteps. Measured. Unhurried. Coming down the hallway. The mob boss stood slowly. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't shout for help. Something told him neither would matter. The door opened. What happened next would be spoken about in Harlem for years, but never in detail. Because legends don't need explanations. They need understanding. The mob boss would be found later that evening in his own office. No signs of chaos. No struggle anyone could point to with certainty. Just a man who had made a decision and paid the price for it. And the city would understand the message immediately. It was 4:52 p.m. when the mob boss realized something was truly wrong. The office door closed with a soft, deliberate click. Not slammed, not forced. Just closed, like punctuation at the end of a sentence that had already been written. He turned. Bumpy Johnson stood a few steps inside the room. No entourage, no weapon drawn, no hurry in his posture. He wore a dark overcoat, perfectly pressed, as if he'd stepped out for a meeting that had been scheduled weeks ago. His face was calm, unreadable, carrying the quiet authority that made powerful men feel suddenly smaller. For a moment, neither man spoke. The silence lasted 6 seconds. Then the mob boss exhaled and said what arrogant men always say when they're cornered. "Do you know who I am?" Bumpy's eyes didn't move. "I know exactly who you are," he replied. His voice was steady, almost gentle. "That's why I'm here." The mob boss swallowed. He tried to stand straighter, to reclaim the room with posture alone. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. "Business happens. People adapt." Bumpy took a single step forward. "In this life," he said, "there are two kinds of men. Ones who build with people, and ones who sell them." The mob boss's bravado began to crack. He laughed, too quickly, too loudly. "You think you scare me? This is my office. I've got lawyers. I've got protection. You walk out of here, nothing happens." Bumpy nodded slowly, as if considering the argument. "That's the part you don't understand," he said. "Nothing already happened. That's why you're in trouble." The realization hit like cold water. The mob boss looked past Bumpy toward the hallway. Empty. Too empty. "Wait," he said. "If this is about money." Bumpy raised a hand, just slightly. $50,000, he said. "That's what you decided Harlem was worth." The mob boss's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't know it would go this far." Bumpy tilted his head. "You knew enough to count it." Another pause. In that moment, the mob boss finally understood the truth everyone else already knew. This wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't revenge. This was correction. And correction didn't require anger. The mob boss's voice dropped to a plea. "Please," he said. "I didn't know it was you." Bumpy's eyes hardened, not with rage, but with certainty. "That's the problem," he said. "You knew exactly who I was." He stepped closer, stopping just short of the desk. "You just thought I wouldn't do anything." The mob boss's shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a hollow understanding. "What happens now?" he asked. Bumpy answered without hesitation. "Now," he said, "Harlem remembers who protects it." What happened next took less than a minute. No shouting, no spectacle, no chaos, just consequences applied with precision. When the mob boss was found later that evening, he was seated behind his desk, as if the workday had simply ended early. The office was untouched, papers neatly stacked, drink half finished, no signs of struggle anyone could point to, but everyone who mattered understood. The message traveled faster than police reports ever could. Deals were canceled overnight. Pressure eased off Harlem businesses without explanation. Men who had taken phone calls they shouldn't have stopped answering altogether. The betrayal ended exactly where it began, with one man. Bumpy Johnson didn't take credit. He never did. Because justice to him wasn't about headlines. It was about balance. Adam, American, dark and tough. About reminding powerful men that respect was not optional, and that the community was not for sale. Fear fades. Money disappears. But respect? Respect lasts. In Harlem, life returned to its rhythm. Eli Turner reopened his shop without interruption. The men who delivered threats never came back. Rents stabilized. Routes returned to normal. The quiet understanding settled in again, an invisible shield reinforced by consequence. Downtown, the mob boss's name stopped being spoken aloud, not out of pity, out of caution. People learned. They always did. The legend grew, not louder, but deeper. Another story added to the code. Another reminder that Bumpy Johnson didn't rule through chaos or cruelty. He ruled through clarity, crossed the line, and the line would be drawn back, with finality. Adam, American, dark and tough. Stories like this don't survive because of the ending. They survive because of the lesson. In Harlem, people understood something the rest of the world often forgot. Power taken by force is temporary, but power earned through respect is permanent. Bumpy Johnson didn't chase enemies. He waited for choices. And when those choices threatened the community, the response was never loud, just inevitable. If this story hit you, subscribe to support the channel. We're telling the Bumpy Johnson stories history forgot, the moments that made him a legend, the code that made him untouchable. Drop a like if you believe respect will always beat power. And in the comments, what would you have done if you were offered $50,000 to betray your own people? More legendary stories coming next. Adam, American, dark and tough. Don't miss them.